Well, hello, all my Buster buddies, and welcome to all you new hobby hunters. I am your host, Brad Claybaugh, and this is Brad's Boredom Busters. This is a channel that explores all sorts of arts and crafts. So if you're looking for something new to do, this is the channel for you. So before we get started with this video, hey, Buster, show these fine people what to do if they want to subscribe to our channel. Take it away, Buster. Hey, great job, Buster. Thanks for that. All right, all my Buster buddies. So let's do a quick recap. This video is to make a wall hanging in pillow form out of a block from my humanity quilt. If you watched the first video, that was the construction of the block itself, how to stabilize a tie-dye t-shirt, and then cut the pieces to sew together and create the 18-inch block. And so now we are going to proceed with this project. We're up to the point where we're going to start creating our appliques and getting that on the wall hanging and the pillow form. So before we get into making the appliques for this project, we need to go online and download a finger peace sign symbol. So the search that you'll do is kind of dependent on if you're going to sell this project or not. I will probably be selling these after they're finished. So the search that I did is royalty-free finger peace sign clip art. And so the result that I got was this. And this is the pattern that I'm going to be using. But as it prints out, it's too large. I printed that out, scanned it into my printer, and reduced the size and ended up with this. And this is a size that I will use because it leaves me enough room in the center of the block that I can do words above it and below it. And so now I will show you how to take this and apply it to our pattern paper so we have room enough to put our lettering above it and below it. All right, so let's get back over to the table and I'll show you that. All right, gang, so now it's time to make the pattern for the applique. So our appliques are going to obviously go in the center over the t-shirt material. And so the easiest way to do that is create a pattern sheet that has both the finger peace sign symbol on it, and then I'll create the lettering that's going to go above and below it. And so I will take some of the rosin paper that I like to use for patterns. I will cut the rosin paper the same size as this part of the block. So I've measured it. It measures out 11 by 11. So we can remove the block. All right, so now the easiest way to do this is just take the square ruler, line up the 11-inch mark on the side and the bottom, and get that straight into the corner. And that way now, so let's get the curl out of it just by dragging it over the edge in the opposite direction a few times. Get as much of that memory curl out of it. There you go, that's better. Okay, so I want to establish the center so I know where to put my pattern. So as before, just fold it in half. So that's the middle of our sheet. And now I want to get this centered on here. And so what I'm going to do is just cut around this closely. And I'm going to take some quilting basting spray adhesive. Oops, sorry, like that. There you go. And basically it's just a spray adhesive. You could also use a glue stick or anything like that, just to quickly mount it to the sheet here. So let's get this cut out. I just want to get this down on my pattern paper in the position that I want it. So I'm going to take this out to the garage, spray both pieces, get that adhered to it, and then I'll be right back in here and we'll continue. Okay, so I've got our peace sign glued down to my pattern paper. The other benefit of gluing down the printed peace sign, the printer paper is rather flimsy. So by putting it on a heavier weight paper, so it makes it easier to draw out the pattern on the back of the fusible web that you're going to iron onto the back of your fabric. So we're at the point now that I can lay out my lettering, and so I'll do that next. And so after I get everything laid out, then I'll cut it out, and then we'll be ready to move on to our next step of transferring it to the back of our fabric. All right, enjoy the music. Okay, gang, so that's the layout for my lettering. And like I say, once it's all cut out and all the pieces, we can position things a little bit better. I'll measure distances and all, so it really has a nice, clean, tight fit. This is it. So next I'll cut all this out, and then we'll set that aside. Then we'll prepare the fabric for our applique process. So let me get this cut out. I'll do that off camera, and then I'll get back with you as soon as we're ready to work on our fabric. All right, gang, so now it's time to prepare our fabric for applique. And so we are going to iron on to the back side. You always want to iron on this to the back side of your fabric. In my case, a solid is the same on both sides, but if you're preparing a printed fabric for applique, then you want to iron on this is a Heat and Bond Light. It's a fusible web. Then you want to iron that to the back side of your fabric. The Heat and Bond has a bumpy side. This is the glue side. You can kind of see that shining there. And then there's a paper side. So the glue side goes down onto your fabric. And you're going to iron this on just with a dry iron. No steam needed. So we just take the iron and just press and hold. And you see that I've got the fabric larger than the Heat and Bond. You want that because you don't want this Heat and Bond accidentally being larger than the fabric and then getting the glue on your ironing surface. It'll really kind of mess it up for the future. So always make sure you overcut your fabric. We'll let the Heat and Bond and fabric cool down, and then we'll get back over to the other position on the table and trace on our lettering and our peace sign pieces. So I'll show you that next. All right, so here we have our fabric with the Heat and Bond on it. So I have it laid out with the Heat and Bond facing up, paper side facing up. And so now we can trace our lettering and our peace sign onto the paper back side of the heat and bond. Because this is the back side of what will be applied, when it's applied to the block that we've made, it'll be turned over. So when you trace your pattern onto the heat and bond, this is the back side. So you want to trace everything in reverse. So like our C here would go down this way. And same for, the P and your L. Everything goes down in reverse. And so I will trace all these out and then cut them out. And now for the peace sign, because I ran this through the printer, obviously the black side is the face up side. So we'll turn it over, and that exposes the rosin paper, so we know that's the reverse. So those will all go down upside down. And then for the fingers, I marked right and left on that. So when I trace those out, I'll mark that on the heat and bond, so I know their position in relationship to the rest of the pattern when I go to lay it out. And the other thing that you can do, if you have words that have multiples of the same letter, like in my example, the word peace and love, there's a total of 3 E's. So I just cut out one, and I'll just trace that 3 times. All right, so I will trace these out, and then when we come back, we'll lay it out, iron those onto the block in position. All right, so I'll just do this quickly. It'll be on high speed, so enjoy the music. So here we are. I've got all the applique pieces cut out. So now we're ready to do the final layout before we iron on the pieces. So it's good for, patterns such as this to have a printout just for a reference, so you remember how it goes together, so you can see the spacing. So keep that handy. And then we can start putting that together first. Okay, I think that's exactly where I want it. It looks good. It looks pretty centered and even. So the next step is now peeling the paper back off of all the pieces, laying that back down where you want them. Get them all in place first, and then we'll take the iron, and with a up and down motion, press it down, apply heat, pick it up, move it, press it down, apply heat. Do that to all the pieces. And that way, with the up and down motion, you shouldn't get any shifting, and they should remain exactly where you want them. So I'll go through that right now. The other thing, when you're peeling the paper backing off of your fusible web that you ironed onto the fabric, you should have a shiny surface on the back of your fabric. That is the glue. And if it's not, then don't peel the paper off all the way. Put that back on your ironing board and iron it again. And that way you'll get the glue to transfer to the fabric. All right, gang, so these are 2 quilt blocks that I've made up to this point. And so like I say, we're going to make a wall hanging and then a pillow form. So at this point in the project, now we need to prepare our quilt batting that goes inside the quilt sandwich. So we have our quilt block, then the batting, and then a back material. And I think for the back of both of these, I'll just use black fabric, the same as we have on the front. I've seen other YouTubers that make pillow forms, and they use the batting and then quilts without a back material. But because of the type of batting I'm using, it's rather fibrous, and I'm really concerned that it would get caught in the feed dogs of my sewing machine. So I'm going to opt to actually have a backing material before we even put the back of the pillow on. That way it'll contain the batting, and I think it'll quilt up nicer that way as well. So in essence, we will treat both projects at this point still the same as far as putting the batting and a backing material on it as we prepare to quilt it. So you want to cut your quilt batting just a little bit larger than your quilt itself. And so we're 18 by 18. So I have a piece here that's just slightly larger, and that'll go in the back. And then cut a piece of fabric for the back. Also cut that a little bit larger than your finished block. And so I'll prepare that fabric, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to pin it together to hold it in place, so then it's ready to be quilted. Okay, gang, I have a scrap piece of fabric here. So it actually happens to measure a little over 19 inches this way, which is fine. And so I will cut it at 19 inches going this way. Okay, so that is going to be the backing for the quilt. And so now we'll make the sandwich. Okay, so you have the sandwich made, which is your backing, your quilt batting, and then your quilt block. And then there's a couple of different ways of basting it. You can use quilt basting spray. For something this small, it's kind of messy, so I choose not to. And then, so the other best option is with safety pins, but there's special safety pins made for quilts. They're curved. I'll show you how that looks. So these are quilting safety pins. You can see how they have a curve to them. That way you can go through the layers and come up through the top. If you can see that well, there you go. So the curve helps it go through the layers and then come out and be able to be pinned on top. And so they say it's best to just start in the center, and usually it's like just a simple measurement like this. So, I mean, this is such a small quilt. It's like hit one in the middle and the corners here, maybe a few on the edges, just to hold everything in place as you quilt it. Okay, that's all that needs. Now, quilting, I mean, that's really a personal thing. You can really express yourself by a lot of free motion quilting or intricate patterns. I'll show you what I did with my humanity quilt. Because of all the different colors of tie-dye shirts in the background and then the black and white, I didn't want to have the quilting really distract from the overall pattern. Really, I couldn't figure out what color would really work well with everything. So on my original Humanity quilt, I just did a diagonal wavy line, but I used monofilament thread, so there was no competition between the quilting thread and the overall colors on the quilt. And so I probably will do that again with this one. It's really pretty simple to do. You use a walking foot, and a walking foot is great for this kind of long straight line quilting because a walking foot works in conjunction with the feed dogs. The feed dogs pull the fabric from the bottom, but the walking foot has little feet that pull along in harmony with the feed dogs of your sewing machine. So everything feeds through the machine at the same time equally. And that really works out great for quilts, that are multiple layers like this. And so I believe that's what we'll do for the wall hanging. So I'll get set up for that, and I'll show you then how we quilt this up. Okay, so I am going to put on my walking foot. If you're not familiar with one, this is what they look like. This part goes on the post that holds the sewing needle in place, and this helps manipulate the feet that are on the walking foot. And like I said earlier, then they work in conjunction with the feed dogs of your sewing machine. The existing 1/4 inch foot off and install the walking foot. All right, now I'll install my monofilament thread. Okay, and I'm using black on my bobbin thread, seeing we have the black fabric in the back. All right, so let's get this quilted up. The nice thing about it, it doesn't take very long to do this method. Now, the one thing I want to talk about, though, is we don't want to just run everything in the same direction. That'll distort the wall hanging. So you'll see when I do this, I will run down one way, come back up the other, but then back down. So that way I'm going in both directions. Because if everything just kept coming in one direction, it would twist. All right, so let's get started. If your sewing machine has a needle down function, then use that so you can leave the needle in place when you pivot your quilt. And then you can kind of stitch straight down next to it to your next position and then start in again. Okay, gang, so that's all quilted up. A little puckery, but that'll stretch out. That's easy enough to deal with later on. But you want some of that loft also. I mean, that's the whole reason for the quilt batting in there, to give it some lift. And so once we bind it and it gets the straps on it, it'll straighten itself out a bit. Like I say, it can be steamed, and some of that can be then straightened out. But that's going to be how I treat the wall hanging. Now I'll set up for the pillow cover, and that I am going to do free motion quilting on that, so you'll see how that works. I am going to stitch around the lettering and around the elements of the finger peace sign. So I'll get set up for that, and I'll show you how that works next. So I'm opting for this clear free motion foot. That way it's easier to see where I'm going, because I may do some other quilting around the lettering and the peace sign, and this will make it easier for me to see where I am stitching. Most sewing machines have the ability to drop the feed dogs. I did have one Singer before that what did not allow you to drop the feed dogs, but what they did is they provided a little plate that you would snap on over the feed dogs so they wouldn't come in contact with the fabric. And so the other item I am going to put down is, it's a sheet that has kind of a tacky back and then a slick front. And this is designed for free motion as well. You put that on your machine. It allows you to move your project more freely. You can find these at the sewing supply shops or even fabric supply stores. Then another item to have that's really handy if you're doing free motion work are these grippy sewing gloves. They have kind of this bumpy side that actually helps you get a hold of your project so you can move it around easy. Because you don't have the feed dogs moving your fabric, you're moving it, and you have to control where you want it to go. So these help really give you extra control. All right, so let's get into this. As I said, I'm going inside each letter, probably up and around, and to just lock it down. Now there are different stitches you can do. Like I say, I'm doing free motion so I can stay on the inside, but there are other stitches that people tend to use for applique. One's called a blanket stitch, where it kind of stitches on the outside and jumps in, or you could do zigzag, or you could do a satin stitch, which is really a zigzag stitch that has almost a 0 stitch length. So they build up on each other. It's a very attractive look. But for this project, because some of the areas are kind of small to get around, I opted to just do the free motion on the inside because I felt that was going to be an easier way to secure the applique. All right, so you can watch me do this. All right, so that's all the lettering, and the peace sign is quilted. So that'll be good and secure for washing and just leaning against, the normal wear and tear. And so now I think to quilt the rest of this, because I don't want to distract too much from the pattern that's here, I think I'm going to do what they call stitch in the ditch, which basically means just running along the seams here. I'll put on a regular sewing foot, just a standard foot, not even a 1/4 inch seam allowance foot, just a standard foot. And that way I can run all these seams and that'll help secure that. And then I may do some quilting, I think just on the cornerstones, just to help kind of, because that'll secure that part of the quilt down. So let me change this free motion foot and get the feed dogs engaged again, and then we'll get on with it. Okay, so at this point I've decided, actually, instead of a standard foot, I think I'll go back to the walking foot. I think that'd be a better foot for this application here, so things don't move around too much. So that's what I'm going to put on now. Take off my free motion foot. But I think I will get back to the free motion probably for these cornerstones. So we'll start on the inside. One thing I didn't mention, when you're doing quilting, you want to start from the inside, from the closest to the center of your design, and work your way out. That helps kind of stretch and distribute things out toward the edges. So that's why we did all the applique work first. Now I'm going to do the inside line and then the next line out from that. So this is pretty easy. It's just a straight line stitch. So the next, we did the inside, so now all you have to do is straight lines straight across and just keep rotating around. Okay. All right, that's all the way around. Now, what I think I'm going to do on my cornerstones is what they call pebbling. And it's one of my favorite patterns. It's really simple to do. You basically just do circles and you kind of just walk around on itself. Hopefully it'll show up on the camera. You'll get an idea of how it works. And for these cornerstones, I would start in the corner and work your way out toward the edge. So I'll set up for free motion again, and we'll do the cornerstones, and then that'll be done with the quilting for the pillow. All right, Buster, so that's all 4 corners pebbled. See if we can get it here in the camera for you. That's what it should look like. Hopefully that shows up. So I did that on all 4 corners. All right, so that's all the quilting I'm going to do on this block. I've stitched in the appliques, and then I stitched in the ditch, and then we did the pebbles in the cornerstones. So that's done. All right, Buster Buddies, so I hope you've enjoyed this project so far. I know it's been a little bit of a large one, but we're getting through it. All right, we've got the appliques on the blocks, and we've got the blocks quilted. Come back to our next video, the conclusion of our Humanity quilt block. We will be binding the wall hanging and putting the hangers on that. That'll be a quick, easy part of the project. And then we'll be making the pillow form for our 18-inch pillow. So come back for that, don't miss it. Hey, if you've enjoyed this project, please give me a thumbs up. Also, share it around to your friends. That really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming projects. So until next time, peace out, baby, and don't forget to go bust out some art.